My name is June, and if you've ever felt like your entire life's work was erased in a single moment, then you need to hear this story. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or told you weren't enough, then stick around because it helps to know you're not screaming into the void. The story I'm about to tell you is about how I lost an inheritance but found my legacy. Like this video, and let me know in the comments if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours. The lawyer's office smelled of old leather and finality. Dust motes danced in the slivers of afternoon light, cutting through the blinds, each one a tiny, indifferent star in the galaxy of my family's collapse. I sat on a stiff-backed chair, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap, my knuckles were white mountains on a pale map. Across the mahogany expanse of the table, my brother Giles lounged in his chair, a picture of smug entitlement. He'd already been measuring the drapes in our father's study, mentally rearranging the furniture of a life he'd barely participated in. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with sympathetic sorrow, cleared his throat. He read the last will and testament of our father, Charles Dubois, in a monotone drone that felt like a eulogy for a life I was about to be evicted from. The words were a cascade of legal jargon, but the meaning was brutally simple. To my brother, Giles Charles Dubois, went the thriving family vineyard, Dubois Crest. To Giles went the house, the sprawling stone manor, where every corner held a ghost of my childhood. To Giles went the equipment, the cellars, the inventory, the brand, the bank accounts, the entire estate. Abernathy paused, and the silence in the room was louder than any word he'd spoken. He peered at me over his spectacles, and to his daughter, June Aria Dubois, I held my breath, a fool's hope caught in my throat. I was left a single weathered cardboard box. Inside it, my mother's old gardening journals, and as a final, cruel twist of the knife, the responsibility for what the will described as her outstanding personal obligations, a mountain of supposed medical debt from her long illness. A smirk crawled across Giles' face. It was a slow, satisfied thing. The expression of a man who had not just won, but had enjoyed watching his opponent lose. He leaned forward, his expensive suit crinkling. He looked at me, his eyes devoid of any familial warmth, and offered me a job. A pity job. He said he might have a place for me on the bottling line. He said it with the magnanimity of a king offering a peasant a crust of bread. He wanted me there, a living ghost in my own home, a constant daily reminder of his victory and my defeat. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. My throat was a desert. My heart was a stone. I stood, took the box of journals from Abernathy's desk, and walked out without looking back. Giles' soft, triumphant chuckle followed me down the hall, but he didn't know. He saw a box of old notebooks filled with a dead woman's scribbles about flowers. He saw worthless paper, but he didn't know our father had spent years teaching me our mother's secret language. Tucked between the faded ink notes on soil peat and rainfall, between the pressed petals of long-dead roses, was a world he couldn't see, a world he had willingly discarded. Within those pages, written in a code of flower names and weather symbols, were the deeds to 3 parcels of land, 3 plots he and the estate lawyers had dismissed as worthless, sun-scorched scrubland on the far side of the valley, and even more valuable, nestled in the notes for a specific planting season, was the formula, the precise cultivation and fermentation process for a nearly extinct grape varietal our mother had been obsessed with, a grape so difficult to grow, it had been abandoned decades ago, a grape our father called the obsidian tear. Giles had inherited the winery. I had just been given the soul. The door to my small apartment clicked shut behind me. The sound of a vault ceiling. For a long moment, I just stood there in the entryway, the cardboard box clutched to my chest like a shield. The air was still and smelled of the takeout I'd had for dinner the night before. Outside, the city hummed its relentless, indifferent song. Inside, there was only a crushing, absolute silence. And in that silence, the professional composure I had worn like armor in the lawyer's office finally, catastrophically, shattered. The box slid from my grasp, hitting the floor with a soft, papery thud. My knees gave out, and I sank down beside it, the rough texture of the cheap hallway runner scratching against my cheek. The breakdown wasn't loud. It wasn't a storm of shrieking or throwing things. It was a quiet internal collapse, a hollowing out that was far more terrifying. A single hot tear traced a path through the dust on the floor, then another. Then my shoulders started to shake with silent, racking sobs that felt like they were being torn from the very foundation of my being. I wasn't just crying for my father. I had done that already, in the sterile, hushed corridors of the hospital. I was crying for the profound public humiliation, for the cold, dismissive way Giles had looked at me, as if I were a piece of furniture he was choosing to discard. I was crying because I had been erased. My entire life, my every contribution to the vineyard I loved, had been reduced to a box of journals and a pile of debt. That pile of debt was sitting on my kitchen table, a mocking monument to my new reality. A stack of envelopes, many with angry red past-due stamps. I had assumed, naively, that the estate would cover my mother's final expenses, but the will was a masterpiece of cruel precision. The debts were designated as personal obligations, tied to her, and by extension to me, the sole inheritor of her personal effects. Giles had inherited assets. I had inherited liabilities. It was a clean surgical severing. My mind started to spiral, replaying every moment, every decision, every ignored warning sign. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the final move in a game that had been playing out for years. I saw it all with a sickening clarity. Flashbacks unspooled in my head, vivid and painful. I was 16, my hands stained purple with grape juice, standing beside my father in the cool, damp air of the cellar. He was holding a glass of a young Cabernet up to the light, swirling it gently. He wasn't talking about yield percentages or market shares, the way Giles always did. He was talking about the story in the wine. He told me, "You can taste the sun of a dry August, the struggle of the vines in the rocky soil. A good wine isn't made June, it's coaxed, it's a conversation with the land." Giles had walked in then, home from his first year of business school, his face a mask of condescending impatience. He'd clapped Dad on the back and said, "Dad, you're a romantic, we need to automate this. Scale up, think about the margins." My father's smile had faltered, just for a second, but I saw it. I saw the shadow pass over his face, another memory. My mother, Arya, after whom I was named, kneeling in her sprawling garden, the one Giles always complained was taking up valuable planting space. Her hands were caked with dirt, her face smudged, but her eyes were bright with a fierce, quiet intelligence. She was sketching in one of her journals, not with words, but with symbols. A drawing of a belladonna flower, next to a series of numbers, wasn't about the poisonous plant. It was her code for a soil pH, reading that was dangerously alkaline. A sketch of a weeping willow didn't mean sadness. It meant a particular field needed more irrigation. My father would come and sit with her, and they would talk in this shared language of the earth. He told me once, "Your mother, she doesn't just garden, June, she listens to the land, and the land tells her secrets." I was fascinated. It felt like magic. Giles would walk by and roll his eyes. He'd ask when Mom was going to stop playing in the dirt and host a proper dinner party for his business contacts. The memories kept coming. A relentless tide. Me, spending my college summers, not on vacation, but working every job at the Vineyard. I'd worked the harvest, my back aching and my hands raw. I'd worked in the lab, meticulously testing sugar levels and acidity, fascinated by the delicate chemistry that turned fruit into art. I'd worked in the tasting room, learning to talk to people, to share the story of our wine, my father's wine. Giles had a summer internship at a bank in New York. He came back with a new watch and a cynical laugh. After college, I came home. Not because I had no other options, but because it was the only place I wanted to be. I became my father's unofficial apprentice, his confidant. We were a team. He handled the art, the soul of the vineyard. I became the bridge, translating his vision into operations. It was me who streamlined the ordering system, me who built the relationships with the chefs and sommeliers, who cherished our boutique wines, me who managed the staff who respected my father's passion. Giles was the director of business development, a title he'd given himself. It mostly involved long lunches, golf games, and presenting my work as his own in board meetings. I didn't fight it. It wasn't about the credit. That's what I told myself. It was about the work, about protecting my father's legacy. What a fool I'd been. The worst memory, the one that made the breath catch in my chest, was from the last few months of my father's life. He was weaker, the illness chipping away at him. Giles used his power of attorney to take full operational control. His first act was to fire Miguel Cervantes, the master vintner who had worked with my father 30 years. Miguel was family. He was a genius, a man who could walk a row of vines and tell you what they needed by the color of their leaves. Giles said he was too expensive. A relic. He replaced him with a young, slick consultant who knew how to talk about brand synergy, but who wouldn't know a phylloxera mite if it bit him. My father was devastated. He tried to argue, but he didn't have the strength. I fought Giles on it. I told him he was cutting out the heart of the winery. He'd looked at me with that same cold, dismissive expression I'd see again in the lawyer's office. He told me, "June, this is a business, not a hobby farm. Your sentimentality is a liability." That's when I should have known. That's when I should have seen the end game. Lying there on my floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my own naivety, a new feeling began to stir beneath the grief. It was a slow, cold burn. It started in my stomach and spread through my veins, a quiet, clarifying rage. My breathing steadied, the self-pity evaporated, replaced by something hard and unyielding. Resolve. I sat up. My eyes fell on the cardboard box. My mother's journals. It wasn't about revenge. I repeated the phrase to myself, a mantra against the venom I felt rising in me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about restoration. Giles had mistaken sentimentality for weakness. He had mistaken my quiet dedication for a lack of ambition. He had thrown away the heart of the family, and in his arrogance, he'd handed me the key to its soul. I pulled the box towards me and lifted the lid. The scent of dried lavender and old paper filled the air. My mother's scent. I reached in and pulled out the first journal, its leather cover soft and worn, I opened it to a random page. A delicate drawing of a foxglove, its bell-shaped flowers cascading down the page. Next to it, a series of numbers, and what looked like a hand-drawn map of a patch of land. To anyone else, it was meaningless, a gardener's doodle, but I knew foxglove was Mom's symbol for a deed, and the map, it was a corner of the estate I hadn't thought about in years. I spent the rest of that night, and the entire next day, on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by my mother's legacy. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat. I moved from journal to journal, my fingers tracing the faded ink, my mind racing to decipher the intricate code my father had taught me. It was all there, a breathtakingly elegant system, hidden in plain sight. Each flower, each weather pattern, each notation about the moon cycle meant something else. A soil analysis, a water table depth, a property line, a bank account number for a small dormant account my mother had kept, the one that would pay for her personal obligations. And then I found it, in a journal from the year before I was born, bound in dark green leather. It was a section dedicated to a single mythical grape, the obsidian tear. My mother had been one of the last people to cultivate it, before a blight wiped out nearly every vine in the region. She believed it produced the most complex, most beautiful wine in the world, but it was temperamental, fragile, and required a unique combination of soil, sun, and stress to thrive. The industry had given up on it, but my mother hadn't. Her notes were meticulous. She detailed the exact mineral composition of the soil required, high in iron, with traces of volcanic basalt. She noted the precise angle of sunlight needed, a west-facing slope that caught the harsh afternoon sun, but was shielded from the morning by a ridge. She documented a unique trellising system and a fermentation process that used a wild yeast strain she had isolated from the skin of the grapes themselves. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a biography of a grape, and on the last page of the section, a drawing of a star magnolia, her symbol for a final discovery, a secret revealed. Beneath it, a map that corresponded exactly to the deeds for the 3 parcels of worthless scrubland I had inherited. The land Giles had discarded was not worthless. It was the only place on earth where the obsidian tear could live again. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't the triumphant smirk of my brother. It was something different. It was the smile of an architect looking at a perfect, beautiful blueprint. Giles thought he had the kingdom. He had the castle, the walls, the treasury, but he'd thrown away the map to the dragon's hoard. He'd left me with a pile of debt, a box of old books, and a pity job. He had no idea I was about to build an empire right under his nose. The pity was all his. The first step in building an empire is to survey the ruins of the old one and salvage the stones. My first call wasn't to a lawyer or a bank, it was to a ghost. My first call was to Miguel Cervantes. After Giles had so unceremoniously fired him, Miguel had fallen off the map. I knew he wouldn't have gone far. The valley was in his blood as much as it was in mine. I found him working at a soulless, high-volume winery on the other side of the county, the kind of place that sold its wine in boxes and prided itself on consistency, which was just another word for mediocrity. He was their cellar master, a title that was an insult to his artistry. It was like hiring Michelangelo to paint fences. I met him in a dusty diner, halfway between his new life and my old one. He looked older than I remembered. The fire I'd always seen in his eyes had dimmed to a low ember. He carried a weariness that went bone deep. He was polite, of course, but reserved. He thought I was there to offer condolences about my father, maybe to reminisce. I slid one of my mother's journals across the cracked vinyl of the table, the dark green one. I had it open to the section on the obsidian tier grape. He looked at me, then down at the journal. He picked it up with a reverence that made my throat tighten. His calloused fingers, the fingers of a man who had spent a lifetime in communion with vines, traced my mother's elegant script. He didn't need me to explain the code. He and my parents had spoken the same language. For a few long minutes, he just read, his brow furrowed in concentration. The noise of the diner, the clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation seemed to fade away. Then he looked up, and for the first time, I saw the old fire rekindle in his eyes. It was a spark of disbelief, then wonder, then a blazing, brilliant hope. He whispered the name of the grape like an incantation. Obsidian tear. I thought, your father said all of Arya's research was lost. I shook my head. Giles thought it was. He thought these were just gardening notes. Miguel's gaze was intense. He looked from the journal to me, really seeing me for the first time, not as Charles' daughter, but as something new. He tapped a drawing of a specific trellising system, a low-slung, spiraling design I'd never seen before. This is genius. It stresses the vine just enough to concentrate the sugars, but protects the fruit from sunburn. Your mother, she was a poet of the earth. I leaned forward. Miguel, the deeds to the land described in these notes, I have them. It was the scrubland up on Whisper Ridge. Had Giles let them go? He thought they were worthless. A slow, wide grin spread across Miguel's face, erasing the years of weariness. Worthless? That man wouldn't know gold if he was drowning in it. Charles and I walked that land 30 years ago. Your father always believed there was something special about it, but we could never get the soil tests right. Your mother, she solved it. The basalt, of course. It provides the minerality. This was the moment. This was the foundation stone of everything I was about to build. I took a deep breath. Miguel, I'm going to replant those vines. I'm going to bring back the obsidian tear. But I can't do it alone. I don't have your experience. I don't have your art. I need a master vintner. I need the master vintner my father always wanted. His smile faded, replaced by a look of grim reality. June, that land hasn't been worked in a generation. The soil needs to be amended, the irrigation established. It will take years before you see a single grape, and even longer for a bottle of wine. It takes money, a lot of money. Money I suspect your brother did not leave you. He was right. The plan was beautiful on paper, but reality was a brick wall. This is where the second part of my secret plan came into play. The part that required a different kind of courage. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the table. It contained a detailed proposal. I had spent a week locked in my apartment, fueled by coffee and sheer audacity, cross-referencing my mother's journals with modern soil maps, plat surveys, and financial projections. I had mapped out a 5-year plan, from land reclamation to first bottling, and I had a strategy for the money. I'm going to mortgage the land, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Miguel looked at me, his skepticism clear. A bank will not give you a loan for raw, undeveloped scrubland, based on a dead woman's notebook and a dream. I know, I said. A big bank won't. But I wasn't going to a big bank. I was going to see Arthur Vance. Arthur Vance ran the last truly independent community bank in the valley. He was a contemporary of my father's, a shrewd but deeply honorable man who had seen the valley change from a community of farmers into a playground for corporate investors. He had financed my father's first expansion and had always disliked Giles' slick, impersonal approach to business. More importantly, he had a deep and abiding respect for my mother. The next day, I walked into the Oak Valley Community Bank. It felt like stepping back in time. There were no glass partitions or sleek digital displays, just solid oak desks and the smell of old money. Arthur Vance didn't have a secretary bar his door. He saw me through his office window, stood up, and beckoned me in himself. He was a tall, stooped man with kind eyes and a handshake like a warm leather glove. He expressed his condolences, and I could tell they were genuine. I didn't waste his time with a long, emotional preamble. I laid my mother's journal and my business proposal on his desk. I watched him as he read, much as I had watched Miguel. He was slower, more methodical. He put on a pair of reading glasses and scrutinized the hand-drawn maps, the deeds, the financial projections. He'd occasionally look up at me, his expression unreadable. This was the biggest gamble of my life. If he said no, the dream died right here on this desk. When he was done, he took off his glasses and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. He said, "Your brother was in here last month. He wanted to buy my bank. Said community banking was a dinosaur, and he wanted to absorb my assets into his portfolio before I went extinct. I told him to get out." My heart gave a hopeful leap. He tapped the journal with a long, bony finger. "Your mother, Aria. She was a remarkable woman. She once came to me for a small loan to buy a plot of land. Said she wanted to grow roses. My advisors told me it was a poor investment. I gave her the loan anyway. A year later, she came back and paid it off in full, with a bouquet of the most beautiful roses I had ever seen. She said, 'Sometimes, Arthur, the best investments are the ones that feed the soul, not the wallet.'" He looked at my proposal again. "This is a massive risk, June. You have no collateral but the land itself, which the county values at next to nothing. Your business has no history. Your product is a myth. I know, Mr. Vance, it's a leap of faith." He smiled, a small knowing smile. "Your father's greatest strength, and his greatest weakness, was that he trusted everyone. Your brother's is that he trusts no one. I wonder which path you'll take." He opened a drawer, pulled out a loan application, and pushed it across the desk. "Let's feed the soul, June. But for God's sake, let's also get some surveyors out to Whisper Ridge and make this official. And call me Arthur." Leaving the bank, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just about the money, it was validation. Someone else saw the value in what Giles had thrown away. Someone else believed the legal side was a plausible nightmare, just as I'd anticipated. The deeds were in my name, but untangling them from the larger estate, which was still in probate, was a delicate dance. My brother's lawyers, on hearing that I was mortgaging the useless land, raised a stink. They claimed it was technically still part of the greater estate's potential assets until the probate period was fully closed. This was a debatable legal point, a gray area designed to stall and intimidate. They sent letters filled with threats of injunctions. It was exactly the kind of bullying I expected. But Arthur, my new, quiet ally, had the best small-town lawyer in the county on retainer. This lawyer, a woman named Clara, knew probate law inside and out. She argued that since the land was specifically deeded to me as a separate, non-liquid asset in the will, and since Giles had formally, in a letter to the estate executor, declared it of no material value to Dubois Crest, he had effectively forfeited any claim to it. His own arrogance became my legal shield. The debate could have dragged on for months, a classic strategy to bleed a smaller opponent dry with legal fees. But Arthur quietly stepped in. He made a single phone call to the president of the regional bank that held Giles's massive operating loans, a man he played golf with every other Thursday. He mentioned in passing that the unstable and aggressive legal actions of one of their major clients was causing a bit of a stir in the valley's business community. The threatening letters stopped the next day. This was a lesson I took to heart. Power isn't always about shouting the loudest. Sometimes, it's about knowing who to whisper to. With the loans secured and the legal challenges silenced, the real work began. Miguel quit his job the day the loan was approved. We met at the base of Whisper Ridge, the 3 parcels of land stretching up the hillside before us. It was exactly as Giles had described it, sun-baked, rocky, covered in thorny scrub and dry wild grasses. It looked hopeless. But Miguel wasn't looking at the scrub. He was crumbling the reddish dirt in his hands. He was looking at the way the light fell across the slope. He pointed to a line of distant peaks. "The wind that comes over that ridge," he said. "It's dry and cool. It will keep the mildew off the leaves." He gestured to a shallow ravine. "We can build a reservoir there to catch the winter rains. This land isn't worthless, June. It's just sleeping." For the next 2 years we worked. We didn't build a winery. We built an ark. We cleared the land by hand, preserving the native oaks and wildflowers my mother had documented in her journals. We amended the soil, trucking in tons of compost and the specific volcanic minerals the obsidian tier craved. We laid irrigation lines, not with brute force sprinklers, but with a precise water-saving drip system that fed each individual vine. And then, we planted. We couldn't buy obsidian tier vines. They didn't exist in any nursery. But my mother, in her infinite foresight, had preserved several original cuttings. She had grafted them onto the rootstock of a wild, disease-resistant grape variety in a hidden corner of her garden, the one Giles never bothered to look at. Before I left the estate for the last time, I had taken cuttings from those ancient, gnarled mother vines. They were my secret inheritance. We propagated them in a small, makeshift greenhouse. It was a slow, painstaking process. Many of the first-generation grafts failed. It was heartbreaking work. There were days I'd sink onto the ground, covered in dirt and sweat, my back screaming, and think I was insane. Giles was probably sitting in his air-conditioned office, signing deals, while I was out here, trying to resurrect a ghost. But then Miguel would bring me a cup of water and point to a tiny green shoot emerging from a cutting we thought was dead. And he'd say, "Patience, Jeffa. The best things take their time." He called me Jeffa, boss. At first it felt strange, but slowly, I grew into the title. I wasn't just my father's daughter, or my brother's discarded sibling anymore. I was the founder of Vineyard, named in honor of the woman who had given me everything. The first move of a quiet coup isn't a cannon shot, it's a whisper in the right ear. For 3 years, Vineyard was nothing more than a rumor, a ghost story told over glasses of other people's wine. We worked in relative anonymity on Whisper Ridge. People in the valley saw the activity, the clearing of the land, the trellises going up in their strange spiral formations. The consensus, orchestrated by Giles' dismissive comments at the local country club, was that poor June was indulging in an emotional, and ultimately doomed, vanity project with her inheritance. "Let her play in the dirt," he'd say with a wave of his hand. "It keeps her busy." He had no idea he was watering the seeds of his own destruction. Those years were a blur of relentless, back-breaking, soul-affirming work. The vines took root. They grew slowly at first, then with a stubborn, wiry strength. Miguel was a maestro, conducting a symphony of sun, water, and soil. He seemed to have an almost psychic connection to the plants, knowing what they needed before they showed any sign of stress. He taught me how to read the language of the leaves, the subtle curl that meant thirst, the slight yellowing that signaled a nitrogen deficiency. I learned the rhythm of the seasons not from a calendar, but from the earth itself. It was a stark contrast to my previous life of spreadsheets and sales reports. This was real. Our first harvest was small, almost heartbreakingly so. The yield from the young vines was tiny. We harvested the dark, almost black grapes by hand. In the cool of the pre-dawn hours, our headlamps, cutting cones of light through the morning mist. The grapes were small, thick-skinned, and intensely aromatic. They smelled of blackberries, black pepper, and something else, something wild and mineral, like wet stone after a thunderstorm. The winemaking process was just as my mother's journal had described. We used the wild yeast Miguel had carefully cultivated from the grape skins. We fermented in small, open-topped oak barrels, punching down the cap of skins by hand 3 times a day. It was ancient, inefficient, glorious work. Giles, I knew, was using giant, temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks, a process as romantic as manufacturing soda pop. He was making a product, we were crafting a story. We aged the wine for 18 months in French oak. The waiting was the hardest part. All our money, all our work, all our hope was locked away in those silent barrels. During that time, I built the business side of Vineyard. I designed the label myself, a simple, elegant drawing of a star magnolia, my mother's symbol for a secret revealed. I built a website, telling the story of the land, of my mother, of the lost grape. I wasn't just selling wine, I was selling a legacy. Meanwhile, the first tremors were beginning to shake the foundations of Dubois Crest. Giles, in his infinite wisdom, had doubled down on his strategy of volume over value. He had ripped out acres of the older, less productive, but more character-filled vines to plant high-yield, generic varietals. He'd signed a massive distribution deal with a national supermarket chain. The Dubois Crest label, once a byword for boutique quality, was now appearing on end-of-aisle displays next to celebrity-branded rosés. The price point dropped, the volume soared, and for a while, the balance sheets looked fantastic. But the soul of the winery was gone. The old guard noticed, the sommeliers at high-end restaurants, the collectors, the loyal customers who had been buying our family's wine for decades. They tasted the new vintages, and they knew the complexity was gone, the character was gone. It was competent, palatable, and utterly forgettable. Miguel still had friends, cellar hands, and vineyard managers, still working at Dubois Crest, who kept him informed. They spoke of a place that was no longer a home, but a factory. The long-tenured staff, the ones who remembered my father, were leaving, replaced by younger, cheaper labor, who didn't know the land. Giles saw it as streamlining. He was trimming the fat. He didn't realize he was cutting out the muscle and bone. The week our first vintage of Obsidian Tear was ready to be bottled, I made my first move. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't an ad. It was 6 unadorned bottles of wine, packed in simple wooden boxes. I sent them, via a trusted courier, to 6 specific people. One went to a legendary wine critic in San Francisco, a woman so influential, a single score from her could make or break a winery. My father had despised her, claiming she had a palate of tin and the soul of an accountant, but I knew Giles worshipped her scores. One went to the head sommelier at the most exclusive restaurant in New York, a man who had dropped the Dubois Crest label a year ago, telling Giles to his face that his wine now lacked narrative. 3 went to the owners of the 3 largest regional distributors, the very ones who had built their fine wine portfolios on my father's work and were now being pressured by Giles to take on more and more of his mediocre supermarket-grade product. The last bottle, the most important one, went to Arthur Vance, with a simple handwritten note. Arthur, you fed the soul. Here is the first harvest. With my deepest gratitude, June. And then, we waited. Silence. For a week, nothing happened. The quiet was deafening. I started to doubt myself. Maybe the wine wasn't as good as I thought. Maybe no one would care. Maybe Giles was right, and I was just a sentimental fool, playing in the dirt. The panic began on a Tuesday morning. Miguel got a call from his friend, a cellar hand at Dubois Crest. The friend was laughing so hard, he could barely speak. Giles was apparently in the middle of a full-blown meltdown. He had been on the phone all morning, screaming at his sales team. It seemed the New York sommelier had called him personally. He hadn't called to place an order, he'd called to tell Giles he had just tasted the future of California wine, and it had nothing to do with Dubois Crest. He had asked Giles, "What can you tell me about something called Heir Vineyard?" Giles, of course, had no idea. He'd flown into a rage, demanding to know who was using his family's name. The panic escalated when one of the distributors called with the same question. He had received an anonymous sample of a wine he called revelatory, and he wanted to know where he could get more. The public reveal, when it came, was more devastating than I could have ever. It wasn't my doing, it was the San Francisco Critic. She posted a review on her influential blog. She didn't just give the wine a good score, she gave it a perfect 100-point score, something she had done only twice before in her but it was her words that were the true weapon. She wrote, "I have tasted a ghost. The obsidian tear, a grape long thought lost to history, has been resurrected, and the result is nothing short of a miracle." Heir Vineyard's debut vintage is a wine that defies description, a poem of dark fruit, volcanic earth, and wild herbs. It is a wine with a soul, a story, a narrative. In a world of soulless corporate winemaking, Heir Vineyard is a bolt of lightning. To whatever faceless corporation is producing this, I say, reveal yourself. The world needs more of this magic. The review went viral in the wine world. My phone, the one I had listed on the Bare Bones website, started ringing and ringing and ringing. It was distributors, collectors, journalists, all clamoring to know who we were, where we were, and how they could get their hands on our wine. Giles finally figured it out. He must have seen the name Aria and connected the dots. The phone call I received from him that afternoon was not the triumphant call of a brother. It was the strangled, furious roar of a king whose castle was suddenly under siege from an enemy he never knew existed. "Where did you get it?" he screamed into the phone. No preamble, no hello. The land, the grape. "Where did you get it?" "Inherited it, Giles," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "The same as you. That scrub is worthless. It's nothing." "It's not nothing to the right seeds," I replied. The line went quiet for a moment. I could hear his sharp, ragged breathing. I could picture him in his oversized office, his kingdom, the walls suddenly feeling a little closer, a little tighter. "This is a trick, June, a stunt. You can't build a business on one good review." "I don't have to," I said. "I already have." And then I did something I had been waiting years to do. I hung up on him. The dam didn't break all at once. It started with a series of small hairline fractures. The first sign of the real power shift came not in the form of a phone call or a contract, but as a caravan of expensive German cars making their way up the winding dirt road to Whisper Ridge. It was the 3 distributors I had sent samples to. They didn't call ahead. They just showed up, walking into our modest, still under construction tasting room with expressions of grim determination. Their leader, a sharp, silver-haired man named Marcus, had been one of my father's oldest partners. He had a reputation for being ruthless in business, but fanatically loyal to quality. He looked at me, then at Miguel, and got straight to the point. "We just came from a meeting with your brother," he said, his voice clipped. He tried to sell us on a new line of fruit-infused Chardonnays. He has 100,000 cases of the stuff. When we asked him about Aria Vineyard, he threatened to sue us for breach of contract if we even spoke your name. I remained silent, letting him talk. I learned from my father that the person who speaks first in a negotiation often loses. Marcus gestured around the simple rustic room, with its unfinished walls and sawdust on the floor. This is it? This is the whole operation? This is it, I said. He exchanged a look with his colleagues. Then he turned back to me. We want it, all of it. We'll take your entire vintage. We want an exclusive multi-year distribution deal for whatever you can produce. Name your price. It was the moment I had dreamed of, the culmination of years of work, but I just gave a small shake of my head. I'm sorry, Marcus, but I can't do that. We're selling directly to our allocation list. His jaw tightened. He thought I was negotiating. June, don't play games. This is a life-changing offer. It's not a game, I said calmly. My father built his reputation on relationships, not volume. He sold to people who loved his wine, not to people who just wanted to move units. I'm honoring that legacy. Our production is tiny. It will go to the restaurants, collectors, and individuals who appreciate what we do. We're building a family, not a commodity chain. It was a massive gamble. I was turning down a fortune, but it was a statement of purpose. We were different. We were not Dubois Crest. The distributors were stunned into silence. They were used to dealing with people like Giles, people for whom everything had a price. The idea of a winery turning down a guaranteed sellout was alien to them. They left an hour later, frustrated, but also, I could see, deeply impressed. The news of my refusal spread even faster than the 100-point review. It added to the mythos of Aria Vineyard. We weren't just good, we were unobtainable, we were authentic. The client exodus from Dubois Crest began in earnest. It wasn't something I engineered. I didn't have to poach a single client. They came to me. The sommeliers and restaurant owners who Giles had alienated with his inferior product and arrogant attitude started calling. They didn't just want to buy my wine. They wanted to tell me their stories. Stories of Giles being late with deliveries, of him changing prices without notice, of him treating them like they were lucky to have his business. They were starved for a partner they could trust, someone who respected their craft. The most painful blow to Giles, I think, was when the Oak Hollow Inn, a historic hotel that had served my father's wine exclusively for 40 years, publicly announced they were replacing Dubois Crest with Aria Vineyard as their house vintage. The press release simply stated they were returning to a standard of quality and partnership the valley was once known for. It was a devastating public rebuke. Giles' reaction was predictable. He panicked, and when he panicked, he got sloppy. He launched his desperate counteroffensive. First came the cease and desist letter from a high-priced San Francisco law firm. It was a work of fiction, accusing me of trademark infringement, theft of trade secrets, and unfair competition. It was designed to intimidate, to bury me in legal fees I couldn't possibly afford. He didn't know I had Clara, my small-town lawyer with the killer instinct. She read the letter, let out a low whistle, and said, "Oh, this is fun. They've made a lot of unsubstantiated claims here. This isn't a legal document. It's a temper tantrum on expensive letterhead." She drafted a response that was a masterpiece of polite, surgical destruction. She calmly dismantled every claim with documented facts. The deeds were legally mine. The grape varietal was in the public domain. And the only unfair competition was that my wine was demonstrably better. She ended the letter by noting that given the baseless and defamatory nature of his claims, any further action would be met with a countersuit for malicious prosecution. We never heard from that law firm again. His legal threats having failed, Giles resorted to the one thing he had left: money. He called me. His tone was completely different now. The rage was gone, replaced by a strained, artificial bonhomie that was somehow more repulsive. "June," he said, his voice slick as oil, "I've been thinking. I may have been a bit hasty. There's no reason for us to be competitors. We're family." "I am acutely aware of that, Giles. Look," he continued, ignoring my icy tone, "I'm prepared to make you a significant offer. I will buy Aria Vineyard from you, outright. I'll pay you triple what that backwoods bank thinks it's worth. You can walk away debt-free, with a fortune. No more pulling weeds and getting your hands dirty." The offer hung in the air. He was offering me everything he thought I wanted. Money, an easy life. He still didn't understand. "It's not for sale, Giles." His voice hardened. "Don't be a fool, June. This is your one chance. I'll make you a partner, co-owner of Dubois Crest. We can merge the brands. Think of the power we'd have." "A partnership?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. What would my title be? "Head of the bottling line." The silence on his end was exquisite. He remembered his words. He knew I remembered them. "I'm sorry about that," he finally mumbled. "I was grieving. I wasn't myself." "Yes, you were," I said. "That was the most you've ever been. Goodbye, Giles." I hung up the phone. The power had not just shifted. The board had been completely overturned. He was playing checkers, frantically trying to save his last few pieces, while I had been playing a different game all along, a longer game. And it wasn't about revenge, it was about seeing the board for what it was, and simply making the right moves. He had played to win, I had played to build something that couldn't lose. The day of our first public vintage release felt like the whole world was holding its breath. We had decided against a lavish party. Instead, we hosted an open house at our small, now-finished tasting room on Whisper Ridge. The invitation list was exclusive. The handful of clients who had shown faith in us, our small team of staff, Arthur Vance, and a few select journalists. The event was intentionally scheduled for the same Friday that the foreclosure auction for the main Dubois Crest winery and equipment was set to take place down in the valley. A quiet final piece of irony. The tasting room was buzzing. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the polished oak bar and the rows of shining glasses. Miguel, dressed in a simple but sharp suit, looked 10 years younger, his face beaming with a profound, quiet pride. He moved through the crowd, pouring small tastes of the obsidian tear, not just serving wine, but sharing a piece of his soul. I stood by the door, watching the culmination of my impossible dream. The room was filled with laughter, and the low, happy murmur of people discovering something beautiful. And then he appeared. Giles. He wasn't on the list, but he walked in anyway, the screen door sighing shut behind him. The buzz in the room quieted as people noticed him. He didn't look angry or threatening. He just looked empty, defeated. He was wearing an expensive suit that seemed too big for him now. His shoulders slumped. He walked slowly, his eyes taking in the scene. He saw the happy, smiling faces. He saw Marcus, the distributor he had threatened, clinking glasses with a chef he had lost. He saw Arthur Vance talking animatedly with Miguel, the man he had called a relic. His gaze fell on a simple framed portrait on the wall behind the bar. It was a photo of our parents, laughing, standing in my mother's garden. He finally looked at me. His eyes were hollow. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It was the question that had been hanging between us for years. Why go to all this trouble? Why not just take the pity job or the buyout? I didn't answer right away. I led him outside, away from the prying eyes, to a small patio overlooking the vineyard. The vines, our vines, marched in perfect spiraling rows down the sun-drenched slope. "I did it because you never understood," I said, my voice soft but clear. You looked at Dubois Crest, and you saw a factory. You saw assets, inventory, market share. Dad saw a living thing. Mom saw a story. You saw the land as something to be conquered, to be squeezed for every last dollar. They saw it as something to be listened to. He shook his head, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. I made it profitable. I made it a modern business. Dad was running it into the ground with his sentimentality. No, I said, you made it hollow. You ripped out the old vines, the ones with character, because they didn't produce enough. You fired the people who had passion, because you thought passion was too expensive. You took a masterpiece, and you stripped it down for parts, and in the end, you were left with nothing but an empty frame. He had no answer. He just stared out at the land, at the life that was thriving in the place he had deemed worthless. You inherited the house, Giles, I said, delivering the final quiet blow. I inherited the home. He flinched, as if I had struck him. He looked at me one last time, a universe of regret in his eyes. He then turned and walked away, a ghost leaving his own haunting. As he got into his car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara, my lawyer. It was just 2 words. It's done. The bank had repossessed Dubois Crest. The auction was over. Giles no longer owned a single vine in the valley. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a quiet, profound sense of balance, of restoration. The scales so long tipped by greed and arrogance had finally been set right. It was never about revenge. It was about finishing the story my parents had started. I walked back into the tasting room, into the warmth and the light, Ulfard, and picked up a glass of my own wine. It tasted of dark fruit, of the earth, and of a quiet, hard-won vindication. Months have passed. The dust has settled, not just on the dirt roads of Whisper Ridge, but on the past. Aria Vineyard is more than a success. It's a sanctuary. The initial frenzy has calmed into a steady, devoted following. Our allocation list is full for the next 5 years, and there's a waiting list that grows longer every day. We've been able to hire a small, dedicated team, paying them well and treating them with the respect that Miguel was denied for so long. The first check I wrote from our profits wasn't for a new piece of equipment or a fancy office. It was to a collections agency, paying off the last of my mother's medical debt in full. Closing that chapter felt like the real victory. We remain small by design. The temptation to expand, to cash in on the hype, is always there. Investors call, offering fortunes to scale up. But every time I walk out into the vineyard with Miguel, we stand between the rows of obsidian tier vines, now maturing, their roots digging deeper into the red volcanic soil. He'll pick a leaf, crumble it in his hand, and talk about the coming season. In those quiet moments, I'm reminded of what this is all about. It's not about being the biggest. It's about being the best. Not the best in the world, but the best expression of this little patch of earth that my mother understood so well. It's about being true. Sometimes, I take out her old journals. I don't need the codes anymore, but I read her notes on rainfall and soil pH, and I feel a connection, a continuity that money can't buy. She planted the seeds, not just in the ground, but in me. My father cultivated them. They gave me a legacy, not of property, but of purpose. Giles got the estate, but I got the inheritance. He got the house, but I kept the home. And so I'm speaking to you now, directly, because I know that my story, in its own way, might be your story too. Maybe you weren't cheated out of a vineyard, but you've been overlooked in a meeting. Maybe you weren't handed a mountain of debt, but you've had your ideas stolen, or your contributions erased. Maybe you've been told, in 1,000 different ways, that you are a liability, not an asset. To you I say this: do not mistake their blindness for a measure of your worth. The things they discard, your passion, your empathy, your meticulous attention to detail, your sentimentality, are not weaknesses. They are your secret weapons. They are the seeds of an empire they are too foolish to see. Don't fight them on their turf. Don't play their petty games of power and politics. Find your own piece of worthless scrubland. That project no one else believes in. That idea everyone else has dismissed. And build something true. Build something with soul. Your value is not determined by the job title they give you, or the salary they deem your worth. Your value is in what you can create, what you can nurture, and the legacy you choose to build. It's not about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about proving that the best things are not inherited, but grown. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please hit that like button, because it tells me I'm not alone in these feelings. Leave a comment below, and tell me about a time you had to prove your own worth. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their quiet work matters. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more stories about turning injustice into vindication. Remember, build your own vineyard.